Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I wanted to talk a little in this video about a social phenomenon I've noticed with increasing intensity over the past decade or so. I'm not exactly sure how best to begin, so maybe I'll just start by highlighting the tweet that started me down this train of thought. We get it, Janice. You hate women. Mommy issues? Maybe see a mental health professional. In response to what I would say is a relatively benign philosophical proposition. I'm not going to focus on the topic that Janice mentioned, though I'd argue it would make for an interesting discussion. Instead, I'd like to focus on the proposition from the response following it. The very idea that a statement that may be perceived as critical of women in any way therefore means that the maker of the original statement then hates women. I thought to myself, there are many things wrapped up in this idea that would make for an interesting discussion. In a funny moment of serendipity, a frequent commenter of mine decided to jump on my last video and give me some even more personalized content to that end, but I'll go ahead and weave that in later. Anyway, I think the most straightforward place to begin is around the ever more frequent occurrence these days that people take any kind of criticism to mean hatred of the thing being criticized. I have a few ideas as to why this thought process seems to have become so prevalent as of late. A large piece is related, I think, to the significant weight given to the idea of identity these days. The phrase, "I identify as," has become relatively ubiquitous, and elements thereof are considered an important piece in the way people relate to themselves and others. A common example? Rather than being taken as an obvious point of observation in 99.9% of cases, people are now often expected to publicly state their pronouns in their email signatures in work or school. This is a good example for another reason as well. These days, if you were to ask someone about their identity, they would likely first begin listing physical or tangible qualities about themselves, such as race, gender, or sexual orientation, rather than things like interests or values and beliefs. Even when getting to this latter category, these are far more likely to be distilled into neatly packaged labels as well, like Democrat, conservative, or feminist. I suspect a lot of this focus on distillable traits is related to the oft-touted notion of intersectionality that effectively proposes that we consider all factors of a person's background when determining how best to relate to them, rather than holding a consistent policy of equal treatment for all, or the golden rule, or any such idealistic fiddle-faddle as that. However, I think that an effect of this distillation is that people can begin to take on these labels differently than they otherwise might. For example, think of someone who states that they espouse values like, "I believe people should have equal access to basic life amenities," or "I believe people should be treated equally regardless of immutable characteristics," or "I believe in sensible gun control," or "I believe university should be free for all." Each of these individual values are being framed here as something that the individual believes, not as some immutable characteristic of self. They are single points that are open to discussion and debate, and the person may hold each of the views to varying strength and be open to changing their mind in some way. Now, think instead of someone who takes all of these points and distills them down to the label liberal. And I'm going to be using this term very liberally as a convenient example just to make a point, so let's not get too hung up on the exact definition. There are several things that happen here. First, it is a simplification of all the beliefs listed above. It takes 4 concrete ideas and turns them into something intangible and generalized. It removes rather than provides information about that individual. Second, it is a more ambiguous label to begin with. 2 people may technically identify as liberal, but disagree with any of the original 4 points I made before, a combination thereof, or any other points that may fall under the liberal political spectrum. Third, I have found that by taking on a simplified label like this, people tend to be more likely to act like the opinions attached or related to that label are more concretely attached to their sense of self. To use my previous examples, it's a lot easier to hear someone criticize a single idea like universal social programs or gun control than it is to hear someone criticize you for being liberal. In this way, people also open themselves up to becoming defensive or feeling personally attacked if someone calls them liberal in a derisive manner. But everything I'm talking about here is mainly on an individual level. This doesn't even begin to address some of the things that happen on a more interpersonal scale. As mentioned, this kind of simplistic label becomes an aspect of self, but it seems to be intensified through finding community in like-minded others. The more one surrounds themselves with people who think the same as they do, the greater the odds for tribalistic thinking. That is, people who belong to my label are good people, and those who don't are the enemy. Again, this is less common in situations where people discuss individual views freely and are open to discussion with those who disagree, but in those with an alliance to a specific label, different viewpoints feel like a personal attack. In group situations, this feeling becomes magnified, as it becomes an attack on the community, on others the individual cares about, which is often experienced as more intense than a mere attack on the self. In some cases, though, this tribalism constricts even further than just mere in-group, out-group thinking. Continuing with my liberal example, intensely tribalistic individuals may not stop at conservatives are the enemy, but start viewing those as insufficiently liberal as being equivalent to conservatives. People often make reference to the Overton window shifting. This is a good example of that. For example, while some liberals may hold the view that all people should be treated equally, more extreme liberals may instead claim that to treat everyone equally is racist because it ignores inherent social inequities. This may turn off some more moderate individuals, but for those who consider themselves a part of a community, they may feel pressured to go along with the view so as not to lose their social group, or at very least not to be ousted as some kind of social pariah. This is all bad enough without the influence of the internet, but with the internet, especially with social media, this process is amplified many times over. First of all, in situations where there is any semblance of anonymity, obviously this often results in people saying things they otherwise wouldn't dream of saying due to lack of accountability. But even in situations where people are forced to use their real name and pictures, they will often still be more willing to be more aggressive and speak more harshly than they would if they were standing face to face with someone. Of course, this often then gives the appearance that people hold much stronger views than they otherwise do, and it also results in people responding to their internet-amplified views with similarly amplified anger. Time and time again, I have seen friends and family respond to each other in terrible ways over divisive subjects online when they never previously showed any ill will towards each other in real life. As an added bonus, social media algorithms only exacerbate the problem, often either by showing viewers more content that they agree with, thus intensifying their groupthink, or showing them opposite or otherwise rage-baiting material to stoke engagement. Engagement, of course, usually looking like jumping on to aggressively defend one's own views and seek out like-minded others in the comments section again. Circling back now, you can see how there are many elements feeding into the intensity of how one can integrate a simple label into one's sense of self. Many people come to view this integration as almost immutable, as much an aspect of themselves as their skin color or sex. Again, as a result, people may begin to experience criticism of their views as a personal attack. More than a personal attack, even. They view the person offering the criticism as being hateful or bigoted. And when you're faced with hatred, well, that justifies a heightened defensive response in return. With all this in mind, I can start to loop in some of the comments from my last video that I'd mentioned earlier. I'm going to stick to focusing primarily on the points that are relevant to this video. I've seen a Prim Reaper video where she lamented that she was unable to implement her ideas to help men through the agency she works for. This is because she is not a leader. Probably for the best, because from what I've observed from her videos, Prim doesn't have any ideas to help men. Mostly her work consists of hating feminists, which is counterproductive. Men deserve better. It is quite obvious that Prim Reaper hates feminists. Most of her videos consists of this. Like I stated, B is counterproductive because it doesn't really help men. First off, despite what you say, you do hate feminists' feminism. Almost all your videos are negative towards feminists, including this one. It's laughable for you to say that you don't hate feminism. It would be like a racist person saying they aren't racist, but they only say racist comments and make racist content. Gotta say, I love the subtle comparison to racists here, because racists are typically well known for criticizing the ideological viewpoints of those different from them. Way to argue in good faith, big guy. Second, YouTube may not be your job, but you are using the platform to attack people like me, so I will use the platform to defend myself. As I stated, attacking feminists is counterproductive to the goal of helping men, because feminism isn't the cause for men's problems. My main issue with Prim Reaper is that she styles herself as some kind of men's well-being advocate, just like myself. However, instead of discussing actual problems men face, such as capitalist corporate greed, anti-gay bigotry, black pill content, lax gun control, environmental dangers, police brutality, and man-on-man violence, she decides to use her platform to hate on feminists. How exactly does this help men? We should be teaming up to tackle the problems facing today's men, but Prim Reaper uses her talents for hate. So disappointing. Oh well, I'll never stop trying to help men. I'm clustering these comments together because they're all essentially focusing on the same point, the idea that I hate feminists, and moreover, that my supposed hatred of feminists goes so far as to surpass and supersede my interest in helping men. This is a pretty hefty claim in the face of years of dedicated research, financial support, volunteering, and now active counseling service working directly with male clients, but we're going to try and focus on the primary related argument. I will grant that a significant number of my videos are criticizing various elements of feminist ideology. Now, I'll highlight that not all of these criticisms are solely because of feminism's relation to and treatment of men. Certainly some of them are, such as feminism's vilification of masculinity, demonization of male sexuality, minimization or outright dismissal of men's experiences of domestic abuse, challenges to the idea of innocent until proven guilty, frequent mean-spirited belittling of the significance of fatherhood, and rejection of the idea that men could have any need or call to gather together to discuss issues pertaining to their well-being, among other things. But beyond all of that, many of my criticisms of feminism actually relate to my own experiences as a woman and a rejection of many feminist tenets as they supposedly apply to the female experience. A frequent one that I like to return to for obvious personal reasons is the injection of feminist ideology into counseling. Let's go over a few quick examples for a recap. It is important that women who engage in the therapy process, clients and therapists alike, recognize that they have suffered from oppression as members of a subordinate group, and that they can join with other women to right these wrongs. Identifying external sources of problems often results in anger, which can be harnessed as energy to take action for change. Our society has tended to devalue subjective experience in favor of the objective. A goal of feminist therapy is to replace patriarchal objective truth with feminist consciousness, which acknowledges a diversity of ways of knowing. Feminist therapists recognize that both women and men are affected by being raised in a culture where the sexes are differentially privileged. Men who have learned that vulnerability is a weakness may have difficulty expressing emotions in and outside the therapeutic relationship. Women who have learned to subordinate their own wishes to care for their families may have difficulty identifying and honoring what they want out of therapy. The last one in particular not only makes assumptions in advance about the differences of experiences of men and women, something that has always bothered me, but now having had a fair amount of direct experience working with male clients, I find it personally offensive, as I have seen the depth of emotion that men are readily willing to express if only they are presented with an environment in which they feel safe to. As always, feminism presents this wildly biased view of men and the male experience that is truly devoid of any real depth and humanity, and simultaneously acts like women are powerless victims that have been subjugated by the patriarchy and who hold these shared experiences of oppression. For an ideology that claims to be all about female empowerment, all I often see are messages claiming the opposite. I explore and criticize these ideas because I think they are damaging to men and women alike. In my relatively short time as a counselor, I have seen direct evidence of how these ideas harm people and cause them to develop problems. Saying that feminism isn't the cause of men's problems is a bit of a mismatch because I'm not necessarily saying it is the cause of all of men's problems, but I am saying that it is the cause of some of them. But all of this aside, for all the criticism I direct at feminism, this does not mean that I hate feminists. Those are two entirely different things. I can disagree with and even dislike an opinion without hating the person who holds such an opinion. I know people who identify as feminists, who espouse ideas of equality between men and women, but who disagree with ideas like the ones I've just criticized. I don't hate them. I know people who identify as feminists who do agree with some of the messages I've criticized above. I don't hate them either. I think they are misguided. They may have been given some messages from others about reality that they have uncritically accepted, or their perceptions may have been colored by their own experiences. But either way, I don't think them believing in things I disagree with constitutes a hateable offense. And even the most extreme feminists that hold views that I find particularly hateful and damaging, such as the idea that we should kill all men or that men should be culled to 10% of the population and used as breeding stock, I would at very least be willing to try to talk to them and try to change their minds. The reason I feel this way is because I see these people as being separate from their ideas. Someone who identifies as a feminist can believe none of the objectionable stuff I criticize, or can maybe be made to change their mind on some of those things. But even aside from their feminist beliefs, chances are good there are a number of other things I may be able to appreciate about or find common ground with them. This is because people are complicated beings, and just because they assign one particular label to themselves doesn't mean that that label constitutes the totality of their being, or that they will necessarily act or believe the same way as someone else who holds that same label. Sort of like how two people can identify as men's advocates and yet focus on different elements that they feel impact men. Like how I have criticized feminist ideology as it pertains to men's issues, dedicated years of scholarship, published a peer-reviewed paper, and contributed to other research related to men's concerns, and participated in active service delivery counseling men in need of support. And you have definitely done similar, tangible, real-world efforts to address capitalist corporate greed, anti-gay bigotry, black pill content, lax gun control, environmental dangers, police brutality, and man-on-man violence. As a side note, it's not that I don't think that any of these concerns are important, and I did in fact have a black pill video in the pipes for when the right inspiration hits. But I'm only one person and can only focus on so much, so I'm glad that men can count on your help for these aforementioned concerns you listed. Anyway, in closing, we should resist the idea that people can be distilled into convenient categories that we can so easily like or hate just because it makes for an easy mental shortcut. I know there are many very normal psychological tendencies and current sociological patterns that are contributing to that mindset, but I think we can all see how this is contributing to the intensifying polarization of politics and growing inability to have civilized discussions about important issues without acting like relevant criticisms are messages of personal hate. People are only going to make themselves feel worse by assuming that others hate them just because they aren't in exact lockstep with all of their personal views. What's even more important, though, is that I legitimately feel like we are never going to be able to come together and form sensible social attitudes and policies without dropping the defensiveness and developing a sense of openness to debate on topics like these. Being realistic, I don't think that's likely to ever happen, but hey, it's better to at least try, isn't it? Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.